Yo, what's up guys? idiotMOUSE here, and welcome to my open beta patch 16 first impressions video. Before we get started, I want to apologize for the lack of streams lately. I wanted to do a brief break before OB16 came out, and then unfortunately OB16 introduced a new bug where arrow keys will randomly stop functioning while in game. For those that do not know, yes, I am an arrow key gamer. I use my arrow keys to move forward, left, right, and backwards. It's not a meme. So Realm is quite literally unplayable for me right now, as every time I scope in a weapon, the arrow keys don't function, and sometimes they even randomly just stop working. So yeah, that's why I've been MIA, but the good news is I'm working on some widely requested videos in the meantime, such as a weapons tier list video. But let's hop into OB16. I'm not going to talk too much about everything in the patch, like skins or cross progression. I'm going to focus more on things that affect the meta or gameplay changes. So with that being said, the first thing you're probably going to notice about OB16 is the ability to see the first safe zone before the game even starts while you're in the Zeppelin. I'm not sure what the overall impact of this will be on regular servers. Different people approach this knowledge of the safe zone with different perspectives. Some people will immediately drop into the circle, some will drop right on the edge of the circle in the zone just outside of the safe zone. So I don't really know if there's like a predictable pattern because of this change. I will say if custom lobbies and tournaments come back, this is a fantastic change because it eliminates the excuse that a lot of teams come up with, which is, well, I only lost because the zone was unfavorable. This now allows teams to pre-strategize a route in the Zeppelin and should hopefully provide more variety in the early game instead of people always sticking to just one drop spot. Overall, I think it's a solid change. I have no complaints about it. We'll see how it pans out over the coming weeks. Next up, you're going to notice one of the best changes they could have added, which is improved loot distribution. And what that means is basically you shouldn't ever go into a house now without finding a chest. And this is great for a number of obvious reasons, the most obvious being that you don't have to stress out about early game now because you will find a weapon in whatever building you land. Secondly, some zones became entirely dead the last few patches because of lack of loot, so we may now see some more action in places like Sentinel Hold, Trinity Hills, or even maybe Cold Mist and Valley like the old days. These are now legitimately decent drops. I've tested them out, so we're not limited to just places like Lumber and Crossing nowadays. And lastly, it may just be placebo, but because of the increase in chests in all the different houses, it does seem like an indirect buff to armor potions. Because everyone's able to loot more chests, it is more likely you're going to find armor potions, which has a trickle-down effect throughout the game. I'm finding myself looting 1 or 2 armor pots with almost every kill this patch, whereas last patch they were non-existent. So again, it could be placebo, but it definitely feels like armor potions are a little bit more common in the economy, but I still want more. You're going to notice some reskins and visual reworks of abilities and items, as well as some new sound effects. Some people don't find this important, however, I do think it adds to the immersiveness and funness of the game. Shooting a venom pistol isn't fun, but shooting a shredder might be. Healing totem is now healing station, which makes a little bit more sense in terms of class flavor for mage. Totems are traditionally shaman things. Potions have been remodeled, which is great because now you can tell which is which in the fog. I mean, no complaints here. Polish is good. It adds to the depth of the world if things just look cool and fun. So I think it's a good change, and I hope we continue to see more polish on different stuff in the game. Another big change that has been added, cooldowns have been decreased across the board. Everything in the game has been reduced by 4 to 6 seconds. Not a major change, maybe not even noticeable for a lot of people, but a small step in the right direction. Hopefully they are still monitoring cooldowns instead of just doing blanket changes, and they can adjust per ability. Again, I don't see a reason for things like Flask of Healing or Ice Wall or Proximity Trap to have such ridiculously long, 30-second cooldowns. But again, can't complain about another positive change no matter how small it is. Catapults are now going to provide 100% air control, a fantastic change, and funnily enough, hate to bring up Apex, but Apex just had their balloons nerfed this past week, and I actually think Catapults in Realm Royale are now more powerful than a lot of the balloons in Apex, which have been kind of rendered almost useless in some spots. But anyways, I thought it was kind of funny. Air control is good. It allows players to land on sneaky, more specific locations without having to practice the same launch 1,000 times over. It's another great change. Catapults are feeling pretty good now, and I would actually like to see more of them added to the map. I'm not sure what the repercussions of that would be, but would love to see them in more convenient places. Alright, one of the hottest topics of the latest patch is weapon equip time, aka weapon swapping. Basically, a handful of weapons have had the time to equip increased. And what this means is that every time you pull out a weapon, there's always been like a slight delay before you can shoot it. And this has been increased pretty significantly on a lot of weapons. I have the full list of weapons in the patch notes in the description below, but most notably, the Ice Staff and the Slug Rifle. The change here was made primarily to nerf weapon swapping. If you've watched any of my solo versus squad mage videos, you've probably noticed me rapidly switching between Ice Staff and Slug Rifle to increase my DPS. And while it is fun and flashy to do, and I love it, the change is warranted, and let me explain why. One, it's very hard for console players to do, which gives PC players another huge advantage. Two, the weapons weren't designed with weapon swapping in mind. For example, the Ice Staff was intended to be a slow-firing, burstier weapon, but with the Slug Rifle and weapon swapping, it became a fast-shooting burst weapon, which was just too powerful and obviously too oppressive over the last month. Lastly, because of how much burst weapon swapping provided, if you ever got the jump on someone while swapping, they usually didn't have time to react, which is just not fun to have no interaction, right? So I get some people's frustrations. It was a skill check. As Baggins said, it's something everyone can do, but something not everyone can do, if that makes sense. And, you know, I do love weapon swapping, but at the same time, I agree with the change. It was pretty cheesy, and again, that's coming from someone who's abused it to its fullest potential since the game's inception. I'd rather see more skillful things added to the game that everyone can do, such as maybe smaller projectiles, smaller hitboxes, rather than trying to use weapons in a way they weren't intended to be used. But rip weapon swapping, solo squads just got a whole lot harder. We'll see what we can do about it. But this is actually a good time to transition into the balance changes and to start with the Ice Staff. It's simply been nerfed by 10%. Some think this wasn't impactful enough, but the reality is now it takes 5 full damage shots to take someone from 3,300 HP to 0, whereas before it was 4 shots. I think it's pretty significant, especially now with weapon swaps being unusable. However, I do think it is still viable in solos and duos. I'm not sure if it's the best thing, but it is still viable. It's a very strong weapon and will continue to be a very strong weapon as long as Ice Block and Ghost Walk are part of the mage's kit. However, again, I am starting to favor the Stone Staff a little bit more. I will say, and you guys have heard me say it 1,000 times, the lack of armor potions in the current state of the game does allow for Ice Staff to still be pretty strong, because a lot of people simply aren't at full HP. At this point, I do think it's going to come down to preference on Ice Staff versus Stone Staff. Stone Staff to me is now hands down a better weapon. However, it is more difficult to be consistent with because it's a 3 projectile weapon, so there is a bit of a trade-off. I do think Mage still has a lot of experimentation to be done as the new meta kind of settles, but you know, variety is good. Having 2 good weapons is a good thing instead of just 1. Next up is the Longbow nerf, which has had the drawback time increased by 40% and the damage increased by 10%. And let me just say that I absolutely love this change as a Hunter main. Not because it's a buff, it's definitely not a buff, but it turns Hunter from a spammy, low skill cap class to one that only, you know, a class that only used Longbow, into a class that absolutely has to land its longbow shots, it has to position properly, and then you have to swap to a secondary weapon to finish off opponents. It's not so one-dimensional anymore where you just rush in with the longbow and miss a few shots, but it's very forgiving and you can survive anyway. It's more reminiscent of Old Hunter, which to me was the class that took the most skill. Again, Hunter is now very unforgiving when you miss shots, whereas the previous bow had a lot of leeway. You can't be a reckless mongoloid with the longbow now. It's going to be a massive change of pace for many Hunter players who haven't experienced the slow bow. Just remember, at close range now, the longbow no longer beats the shredder, the axe, or the stone staff. If you want to play a more aggressive style, the crossbow with pincushion build might be more viable for you. I will say, One thing about this change is that the purple longbow does feel pretty underwhelming compared to the legendary longbow. I actually think now this is where the biggest gap from purple to legendary happens, is with the bow. Simply because the legendary longbow with recurve uh, does a little over 1,000 damage now, and headshots for 1,600. And that's kind of a threshold in the game, right? 1,000 HP a lot of the time will kill a chicken in one shot, and 1,500 a lot of the time will kill somebody and turn them into a chicken in one shot. Whereas the purple longbow hits for like 985 and headshots for like 1,400. So it's not quite meeting that threshold, whereas the legendary longbow does. So purple feels a little underwhelming, but legendary longbow feels really freaking good, and I love it. So good change. The last balance change was just a change to the speed of the flare projectile. It's been increased, but it's not really a game-changing addition, although it is a very minimal buff. Next up, we have some rune changes. The ability and movement ability runes have had their effect reduced from 50% to 35%, and the passive repair rune has gone from 20 armor regen per second to 10. I'm not going to complain about these changes. I think these 3 runes all needed nerfs. There's too much of a power gap when someone finds these versus when someone doesn't. But I will say I wish these issues were addressed differently. First, I would have liked to simply see the cooldown runes just simply removed and replaced with more interesting runes, such as maybe your weapon has an extra bullet, or you forge 15 seconds faster or something. I don't know, something more interesting and flavorful. These cooldown runes are basically just hindering and limiting the possibilities of just lower cooldowns in general, because anytime a spell cooldown is considered, they have to consider the rune effect, right? And unfortunately, I think the community is pretty much in agreement that we want lower cooldowns, and it's not quite where we want it to be yet. Secondly, passive repair, I believe, should just be removed and given to everybody as an option in the talent tree. Again, you guys know how much of a believer I am in equal armor for all of us, instead of scrambling to find it in the end game. Again, I hate to bring up Apex, a second time, but if there is one thing I hope Realm takes from Apex, it's the concept that everyone having armor is okay. It doesn't need to be rare. It makes for more interesting endgame fights. So again, another change that is good, but I still would have liked to see them changed in a different way or removed entirely. Lastly, we got some bug fixes. There's actually a lot of bug fixes, to be honest, but I'm just going to focus on the main gameplay ones. Most importantly, if you've tuned into my stream over the last month, you've probably seen me obsess over the gray shotgun. Basically, the shotgun shoots out multiple pellets, and on the gray rarity version, that pellet spread was more condensed and close together, whereas the green, purple, and legendary rarities were more spread out. And what this meant was that the gray shotgun would consistently hit for its maximum damage, even mid-range, making it easily the best weapon in early game, and usable even in the late game over its rarer siblings. Now that the pellet spread has been changed to match, the other rarities, the gun is now just mediocre. It's one of the weaker weapons in the game, because it also had its equip time nerfed. So it's a good fix. I wasn't a fan of people, chunking you for 700 damage in the first 30 seconds of the game without you being able to do anything. So again, just a nice bug fix, but does kind of ruin those flashy weapon swap plays. The next meta changer is Exaction on Hunter, which was bugged in making all of your shots for the next 3 seconds do 30% more damage. It now only applies to your next shot after dodge rolling. I do wish this stayed as 3 seconds of 30% more damage, maybe even just 20% more damage, because now it's too weak and Withdraw is kind of the no-brainer pick here from the Mastery talents. I'm hoping Exaction gets some sort of change, as there is no longer a reason to use it in my opinion. And this is actually a very big nerf to Hunter, because Hunters do not start with dodge roll, or sorry, they do not start with Withdraw, they start with dodge roll, meaning you now have to forge a third time and need 90 more shards for that, which kind of sets you back another 30 seconds in the game. But I get why they changed it. It wasn't intended, but hopefully we see some sort of buff for Exaction in the near future. Legendary Crossbow has seen a bit of a nerf. It no longer has perfect accuracy, meaning you have to ADS it more frequently. Nothing much to say here other than I wonder if Legendary Slug is going to see this as well, because it does have perfect accuracy only at the Legendary level as well, and it makes sense to kind of make that consistent. And the last bug fix I want to mention is the Venom Pistol, aka the Shredder. It no longer will reduce healing on targets it hits. It's, a welcome change. Shredder is already pretty strong with toxicology, and it was even harder to deal with when it basically ruined your healing totem or healing shout. But I think that's pretty much the most of what I wanted to cover today. That's the gist of OB16. Bugs aside, the patch is good on paper. However, I will say it has made for a slower feel to the game. Fights take a tad bit longer, things feel a little clunkier with changing weapons and draw time on the bow, but the changes are all positive. I'm really hoping in March we get some sort of leaderboard or rank reset along with some better retention tools like achievement-based skin reward systems, simply because I really want to see the player base increase and stay increased. I still think there needs to be some balancing with Warrior. It was untouched this patch and feels like the class to beat to me. Axe, I wish it would go back to its slower refire rate because it's pretty unstoppable now in a good player's hands. I'd also like to see a small nerf to Toxicology and bring it down to 25% to match Pincushion. But overall, you know, I think the streak continues. This has been a really good 3-month streak of good patches in 2019. Hi-Rez has been listening to the community. Communication's been great. I just think the diehard community wants a tad bit more in terms of things to do and grind, whether that's tournaments, a leaderboard, a ranking system, anything. Just give us something to latch onto and kind of grind out and have something to be doing ongoing. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. That's OB16. I'm going to get back to working on a weapons rating video and some other stuff. If you guys have any specific videos you want to see, let me know. Happy to make anything. Just let me know what you guys want to see. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy.
Not yet. Armoring up.